Hey, I'm Jay Van Dam, and I'm a part of Group 10. And our project for the semester was iHike. This semester with iHike, we wanted to create a mobile hiking application that outdoor enthusiasts can use to share useful information on their favorite trails while enjoying them. Our system would utilize GPS technology to allow for the recording of both recreational trips, report conditions, and pin potential hazards. This would be crowdsourced data that local authorities like park rangers and trail maintenance crews could use to formulate plans to take action as issues arise. The overarching mission of iHike is to provide a simple to use platform for both the unsung trail maintenance crews and the communities that surround these trail systems in order to promote and sustain the necessary care for them. We identified two work roles to use our application: outdoor enthusiasts and local authorities. The enthusiasts are community-minded people who utilize the local trail systems regularly and need a source of reliable reports on conditions of the trails that they frequent. As for local authorities, they consist of volunteers and those associated with organizations responsible for maintaining trail systems, such as the North Country Trail Association, which we interviewed for this project. The user classes that coincide with these work roles that we identified are hikers and mountain bikers and trail maintenance volunteers. Now, the demographics for these two classes, they can vary a ton. But for this project, we interviewed mountain bikers, and they were generally males in the early to mid 20s with college degrees, and they were very comfortable with GPS technologies. And they were people who frequented trails and used them within a weekly basis in most cases. Now, with trail maintenance volunteers, they generally are going to be more established maintenance crews associated with trail organizations. But with the design of iHike, we intend on, in a way, recruiting hikers and mountain bikers and dog walkers and anybody who use trails to maintain them. With these two sides to the user base of the application, in order to make it work as it was designed, we ended up kind of dividing the tasks in two. For the hiker side of things, we need to get them to a trailhead. They might want to track a hike to not get lost or share with friends. After they have a hike, they might want to donate to a chapter, which is just kind of a localized trail maintenance crew for a section of a trail. And also the ability to report a less urgent sort of trail condition. This could be like something as simple as like a tree that fell down or a section that was highly eroded from heavy rainfall the day before, which is pretty frequent in Michigan. And lastly, we kind of thought that we should have a tool for more urgent emergencies, so we included that as well. Now, the volunteer kind of version of reporting a trail condition is to promote a project. So that's something that's going to be like adding something to a trail rather than fixing something on a trail. This could be like something as simple as putting a bench at the top of a hill for giving rest, or suggesting adding a boardwalk over a marshy area. This is where the crowdsourcing of the app kind of comes into play again, where the community can decide whether or not a project should actually happen or not. And the sharing of a report or project, for that matter, either promotes or demotes something on the feed. And it's on this feed that I mentioned where users will be able to volunteer for projects, and to help with the organization of things, we provide the ability for volunteers to form groups and form windows of time that everyone agrees upon to be more productive once the time comes. And the last task that we supported was the ability to track these volunteer hours. For our prototyping, we used the service called Figma. Figma was great. It really did get the job done, but there were a few downsides to it. Being completely new to it, it did take a lot of experimenting on our end to get things to work how we wanted it to. Also, organization of everything got a little crazy, as you can see. Here gives an overview of our low fidelity prototypes. The left side being kind of the earlier versions that we did, and the right two kind of be more towards the final product that led us into our high fidelity prototype. Knowing that the map of our application was going to be a screen that our users were going to be spending most of their time on, it not only is a large part of their experience with the app, but it's also a thing that takes up a lot of screen real estate. We ended up moving away from the more cool looking menus in the beginning to a more simplified kind of static menu bar that just exists on the bottom of the screen that you see on the right here. And here's a view of the maps for the different prototype versions. As you can see, the different variations of pins that we had. Some a little bit more prehistoric than others. But one other thing we found beneficial with the static bottom bar is that it's more accessible with one hand because it's in the placement of where your thumb, left or right-handed, would be able to reach. And this use while in motion is how we imagine our users accessing our app at a glance. And here's how our reporting forms were handled in our different versions. And again, we kind of swayed more towards the simpler design and with an overlay design, which holds the state of the screen at which you press the report button on, reducing the need for users to backtrack to get where they were before. For our formative evaluation, we chose tasks that touch on what we considered foundational to iHike and led into subtasks of iHike. Some of those tasks were track a hike, create a trail report, and commit to a volunteer project. So here's our high fidelity prototype. Here's the home page here. First, we're going to search for a trail called Mullis Pass. Type it in here. Click Submit. Brings you to the trailhead here called Mullis Pass. But instead of jumping into the trail's profile, we're going to look at this little trail report pin here on major erosion that must have occurred here at some point recently. We can click on these three dots here, check out the trail report itself, and you can see how many volunteers are enrolled to handle it, scheduled for June 14th. And down here is where the hiker or biker displays the photos of the erosion incident. And down here is where, on the scheduled date to handle the report, you can record your volunteer session. And when you finish it, you can go here, press stop, and you can submit it for approval from the community that it's finished. For a summative evaluation, our goals were to get an idea of how easy iHike was to pick up for first-time users, and to find where these first-time users made mistakes and how we could prevent these mistakes in our next iteration. Measurements were made using 4 variables: first click, total clicks, performance time, and total critical errors. First clicks pertain to where the users clicked first at the beginning of each task. This was to help us first to see how well our menus worked, as well as see which direction confusion was skewed during each of the tasks. Number of clicks told us how well our app performed. A task might not take a large amount of time to complete, but users could be fiddling around with how buttons worked or things of that matter. Performance time was a good general performance indicator for the evaluation. And lastly, critical errors were used to indicate at what point users were getting lost. We determined this by how far off users were from completing a task before backtracking. And here's some tables of the raw data gathered from the summative evaluations. Take note that our baseline measurements were based upon our own leisurely pace going through our tasks. And the target levels are goals we thought would be reasonable to shoot for in the final version of iHike for users to meet. And here's the graphs we generated from the raw data from our evaluations. Upon assessment, we definitely see that some of our tasks are more difficult than others. These tasks being more of the subtasks involved in our application, such as donating to a local chapter and tracking volunteer hours. Something to consider, though, is that under the conditions, we were only able to interview people within our personal circles and not anyone from the volunteer side of things. Nonetheless, looking at our survey evaluation data on the bottom left, you can see that the ease of use of our app was rated 6.85 out of 10, which means iHike is due for another solid iteration. So in conclusion, here are a few changes that we plan on making should we do another iteration of the application. For one, we think that proposing a project needs to be changed and be easier to spot and access within the user's feed. We noticed also that in several of our evaluations, users were instinctively seeking out a search tab button somewhere within the screen. So instead of having a dedicated search screen, we might do a lighter weight search button static in one of the upper corners in every window as a convenient failsafe. And lastly, another consideration in design is moving our hamburger menu on the static menu also to one of the upper corners, and reserve that for more of the utilitarian tasks that we really haven't considered yet, like account settings and map preferences.